Ford is up first, and Mr. McLean for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you, witnesses, for all the time and the input you're giving us here today on these important deliberations. My first questions are going to be to Dan McTeague at the Canadians for Affordable Energy. Mr. McTeague, you talked about proposing a rebate for Canadians, or a remit from their taxes on the increase in energy. And I'm a little confused with that, and I'd like you to explain it a little bit, please, because the way the government has actually sold their carbon tax to Canadians is that it already is a rebate to those Canadians that need it, a wealth redistribution mechanism, if you will. Can you comment on why we might need more of the same, if that's the actual proper way to do it, as opposed to just reduce the carbon tax?
Very good point, and thank you for the question, Ms. McLean. The carbon tax, of course, in many provinces, mine included here in Ontario, increased 10 cents a litre with HST in a period of 22 months, well beyond what would otherwise be, an inflationary factor. We also know that the increase in the price itself, more than carbon taxes, the actual increase in gasoline, diesel, and heating oil affecting many parts of the country, and natural gas as well. Fully about 3/4 of Canadians would be caught by this, including those on fixed incomes, have seen prices go on average in 2020 at this time of year, so back to the beginning of the pandemic, from about an average of 65, 70 cents a litre diesel gasoline, then to $1.13 last year, and now $1.55, $1.60. In that period of time, beyond carbon taxes having that direct higher than inflation impact, you have a much higher price in which the federal and provincial governments take either 5% at the federal level or anywhere from 7 to 9%, depending on the province. The further east you go into Atlantic provinces. That's a windfall of money that I suspect is going to contribute to the hardship of Canadians as they are trying and struggling to get back on their feet. You don't have to take my word for it. With MNP Debt Solutions say that over 40% of Canadians are less than $200 away from calling it a day financially.
Thank you, Mr. McTeague. Let's move on. I hear what you're saying there, and I agree. The whole issue of the carbon tax, when we applied it at a $60 barrel of oil, it more or less was the equivalent of pushing it up to a $95 barrel of oil, and thus trying to equate the transition to other forms of energy and making those economic. However, now we've got $90 plus barrel of oil, and we're obviously going to be paying more for oil and the products that come from oil. In addition to the carbon tax, we've got an escalating tax on top of just our energy tax. But I'm glad you talked about the impact on the price of food, because that is fundamental here. If we're failing in our food production and our food provision to Canadians, we are failing very much as a nation. This tax, and particularly the clean fuel standard tax, which is in addition to the carbon tax, are going to provide more of an inflationary effect upon the production of food. Can you comment on that somewhat?
Well, look, it's already a serious situation emerging on the food side with fertilizers now being double the price, and that may not just be a question of scarcity. Your ureas, your nitrogens, both products derived from hydrocarbons. It looks like our farmers are scrambling for product and hoarding or keeping whatever they have. The hoarding would not be the right word. In this case, trying to protect what they have for this year's planting season. And that would mean, of course, inevitably higher prices for everything. As the carbon tax makes its way throughout the economy, much of it is not shielded. Much of it is widely compounding the cost of living well beyond the simple rebates that people receive. But when it comes to food, the totality of the increase in the price of that which we cannot take for granted is something that I think most of us have no argument with. And as you increase the cost of transportation, input costs for processors, input costs, whether it's over output based.
Thank you.
It's creating a problem.
Thanks, Mr. McTeague. One more question here. The oil and gas companies across Canada have provided to Canadians excise taxes, sales taxes, income taxes, municipal taxes, royalties totaling over $500 billion to Canadian treasuries over the past 20 years. In your mind, does this constitute a subsidy to the oil and gas industry?
Very short answer, Mr. McTeague. Please.
Questions often asked. It's not a subsidy. They pay far more than they could ever possibly receive, and unless we're talking about a subsidy, which every single business in this country gets. I'm not a big fan of the oil companies. Took them on when I was an MP, but I never stood to try to kill that industry because I know how important it is for every social program in this country.
Thank you, Mr. McTeague, and thank you, Mr. McLean. Okay.